Hello, hope you're doing great. This is Maria Pannirajan, your friendly software engineer. And in this video, we're going to talk about arrays in C++. We've already discussed how using a variable, using the syntax int number equal to 5, we get to store this value 5 in RAM. Okay, so we get basically allocate a location for it in memory, and we are storing this value 5 here by means of using binary representation. So this is something that we know, and we also know by means of using a pointer variable, by means of using this asterisk symbol, we can store the address of another variable by means of using this ampersand symbol, right? So basically we are storing the location of this variable in memory. So let's say this location is location underscore 1. So that is what will be stored in this pointer variable because we are using this ampersand symbol. Okay, cool. So this is really useful to be able to store a single value into a variable and also a single memory address into a pointer variable. But most of the time when we are solving real world problems, which we do as computer scientists, the data that we'll be using would be bit more sophisticated and interesting rather than just being a single value that we can hold by means of using a simple variable. Yes, definitely using a simple variable, we can do a lot of very interesting things. As a matter of fact, the social media platforms such as LinkedIn or Facebook, which have this like button, right? So we can, in theory, just make use of a single variable that just keeps incrementing every time somebody presses the like button. In that way, we can keep track of how many people have liked a particular post. But LinkedIn and Facebook have much more features than just a simple like button, right? So for a like button, having a single variable, you can just keep incrementing every time somebody presses the like button. So this is fine. But how do you store a list of friends that a particular person has? So we would need something like a friend list, right? So here we need a bit more space, right? And we should have the ability to store the respective values such as friend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and so on, right? And the thing is, all these data, basically all these friends in this friend list, should be for the most part accessible as a single unit, right? Maybe the name of the user is Tom. So in that way, we can actually in theory create something like Tom underscore friend underscore 1 equal to F1, and then Tom underscore friend underscore 2 equal to F2. This is definitely possible. We can actually do this, but it will be a pain, like it'll be really difficult to manage if you're just going to be creating all these variables with just these namespaces: Tom underscore friend underscore 1, from underscore friend underscore 2, from underscore friend underscore 3, F3. And just imagine how many friends you have in LinkedIn or Facebook, like 500 or 1000 people when they are in your friend list. If you're just going to be maintaining them using just a simple variable, it's going to become a programmer's nightmare really soon. So we definitely need a more interesting data structure than a simple variable, which is just like a simple box where you can just put only one value, right? Which is a bit limiting. So we definitely need more interesting and sophisticated data structures. As a first step in the world of data structures using C++, we are going to talk today about arrays. All right. So arrays is basically like a list that enables us to store a bunch of data of the same data type. All right. So instead of being able to store only one value using an array, we can store multiple values and they will all be stored sequentially in memory. And to dive a bit deeper into this, let's just say that this is your RAM. All right. And we know that in RAM we have, like all these physical locations where your data is being stored in a binary representation. So let's just say that these numbers in blue are the location of these respective cells. Okay, they will actually be represented by means of using hexadecimal numbers, but for ease of use, let's just say that these are the locations of the respective places in your RAM. And we know that when we use a regular variable, any one of these cells, basically whichever is available, is allocated for that particular variable, and your value, let's say your value is 5, that value is put in that location. Okay, so this is how a regular variable works. When it comes to an array, what happens is, now the syntax of creating an array is this: first you need to specify the data type of your array, int, and then give a name for your array. We'll call it favorite number. And then the important thing here is we need to then use this opening brackets and closing brackets symbol. So this is what tells the compiler that this is an array variable. All right, and then we can just say equal to 100 comma 200 comma 300. We'll just store these three values. Okay, so it's usually good practice to give the size of your array over here. When we explicitly mention the size of the array, the compiler is going to know exactly how many bytes of memory it is supposed to allocate for this array in the RAM. And it's a very simple calculation because we know that a single value of int data type takes 4 bytes. And we have explicitly mentioned that we need 3 of those over here, right? So that means into 3. So 4 bytes into 3 is equal to 12 bytes. So that's the number of bytes we would need in order to store the values that are present in this array. And since we have mentioned to the compiler over here that we would require 12 bytes to store these 3 values, the compiler would go and look for 12 bytes which are available sequentially in memory. So let's just say from this location 3 onwards, there are 12 bytes available. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so these 12 bytes are available sequentially, right? So, and each of this cell, it represents 1 byte, right? So now what it will do is basically, so these 12 bytes are reserved for this fave underscore number array. And we know that to represent each integer value, 4 bytes are used. So that means, so for the first value, which is 100, the first 4 bytes are used. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so these 4 bytes are used to represent the value 100, in binary representation. And then we know that the next 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So these 4 bytes would be used to represent the number 200, right? So 200. And then finally, the last 4 bytes, which are basically 1, 2, 3, 4, would be used to represent the number 300. Right? So this is basically what is actually happening when we make use of an array. It's not magic. Again, it's just clever engineering. So just like how when we create a simple variable called number equal to 5, since this is of the data type int, 4 bytes are allocated for it, and these 4 bytes are used to represent this number 5. Just like that, in an array, we basically multiply that functionality, into how many ever values we want to store. So when we say 3, it's basically multiplying 3 into this data type size, which is basically 4 in this case. 3 into 4, which gives us the value 12. So 12 bytes, from this point onwards are allocated for this array, and that's how we are basically storing each of the values present in the array. All right, so let's just practically see this in action inside of our Visual Studio IDE. So as we have seen in the whiteboard, the syntax for creating an array is basically you first need to mention the data type and then the variable's name. So we'll just call it favorite number. And then we need to mention how many values we are going to store by means of using this array. So in our case, we want to store 3 values. And then using these curly brackets, we're going to declare the values 100, 200, and 300. That's it. So this is basically the syntax for creating an array of 3 values in C++, right? So how do we access these values now? So the way we do that is by means of using, the variable name, and then, we can just say 0 to get the first value, and 1 to get the second value, and 2 to get the third value. So let's just use a stdcout to print them out and see the values being printed onto the screen. So if we just build and run this application, see, just as expected, we have the value 100, which is basically the first value of the array, printed over here, and then we have the value 200, the second value, and then the third value 300 being printed onto the terminal by means of using these respective index values. So in our next video, we'll be talking more about how this array is basically a pointer variable. We'll be doing that in our next video. But this is how you basically can create an array and then print the values that are present inside that array. Now, in addition to being able to access the values that are, declared inside of the array, we can also change the values. We can actually modify the values that are present in an array. The way we do that is, just like how we would do for any other regular variable. It's just that we'll be using this square brackets and putting the index. Basically, that's how we identify which particular value in the array we would want to modify or change. So here we can just say favorite number 0, instead of 100 we'll just change it to 500. Okay, and let's just print everything once again. Let me build and run. See, as expected, we have the values 100, 200 and 300 getting printed, because that's what we declared initially. And then we have the values 500, 200 and 300. So because we have changed the value over here, the first value over here from 100 to 500, that's getting reflected. So that's how we can basically change a respective value inside of an array. So yes, this was an introduction into the world of arrays in C++. Hope this video was useful, and I will see you again in another video. Cheers!